of real-life ghost stories. And to kick things off this week, I would like to say thanks to some of our newest Patreon subscribers. I would like to thank Elizabeth Romaine, Simone, Jamie D, Christine Sparks, and Christina Saylor. Thank you so much for subscribing to the Patreon. I love you and appreciate you every single day. And our film review this week. Our film review is Presence. Presence was released in 2025. It has 6.7 out of 10 on IMDb and 87% on Rotten Tomatoes. A family moves into a suburban house and becomes convinced they are not alone. Right. First of all, I feel like this needs slightly more explanation than that general synopsis provides. But the film is completely shot from the perspective of the presence, the entity that lives in the home. Right? So we see snippets of the family's lives and we start piecing together bits and pieces about them from the eyes of the presence, which is a really interesting concept. You learn that the daughter of the household, she's been hanging around with people who maybe are doing drugs and drinking and all that kind of stuff. And one of her friends has passed away recently. The son is like a champion swimmer. The mum is some sort of businesswoman. I don't really know what she was doing. And then the dad is just trying to keep it all together, right? And you see the family dynamics. And I think it's very interesting because you don't see the family all the time. You only see snippets of information. So you start to piece it together as an audience member. But it has to be said that unfortunately my likes for this film are limited at best. I liked the concept, right? I thought it was very clever to see it from the perspective of the ghost and to only see snippets of family life. And genuinely, going into this film, I thought, how are they going to make this gimmick last the entire film? Like, how is this going to work? But I do think the perspective did work. And I thought it was a really interesting way to learn about the family. You know, you see bits of the family, you see them when they're alone, you see them when they're vulnerable. And I like a family drama, so I was really curious about the dynamics of the family and how they interacted with each other and what they did when other people weren't around. And to be honest, I wasn't bored when I was watching it. Like, I was keen to see how it played out. I wanted to see what the payoff would be. And I was like, ooh, how are we going to wrap this up? Like, what's going on? What is the entity in the house? You know, I was interested, I suppose. And I'm going to say something that I don't think I've ever said in a film review in the last 6 years of doing this podcast. I really liked the dad. He was the only character that I could get on board with. I liked him. He broke the horror movie dad mold by actually being empathetic and caring. He listened to his children. He tried to have conversations with his children's mother about her behavior. He was trying to make things work for the whole family. He was doing his best. All right, he was listening. He was believing. He was the first horror movie dad maybe I've ever seen that I was like, you're a good guy. I like you. And moving swiftly on to our dislikes. Do you know what? This was not well executed. Look, the premise was interesting, right? Everything being from the point of view of the entity in the house. I get it. It was cool. I'm on board with it. The script was absolutely dire. It was so poor. And I hated the characters. Like, I hated them. I know that people are nuanced and layered, right? And I know that not everybody is just good or bad. But I hated the characters in this so much. I wanted them all to be poltergeisted to oblivion. I wanted them all to wake up and be, choked by flies. I wanted them all to wake up and a clown drags them under the bed and kills them, or whatever it is that happens in Poltergeist. I just didn't care about them. And it's very similar to what I said last week when I said I couldn't wait for all the characters in the Wolfman to die. I genuinely was watching going, I don't care about these characters. I don't care about these people. The only character I care about this is the dad. And I really did care about the dad. I was like, he is a good character. He seems like a good guy. Lucy Liu's character, bizarrely, we find out halfway through the film that she's involved in some sort of criminal activity, but that's it. We don't know what it is. I'm sorry, spoiler alert, we don't know what it is. You never find out what it is. It's just sort of dropped in there and we don't talk about it again. I actually turned around to my friend and I was like, sorry, have I missed something? That she's done some criminal stuff. Well, what's the criminal stuff that she's done? Because I thought that I had just zoned out and missed it. No, it's just never addressed again. And it was just it was a really strange addition. And I have to be really honest, like, this film is not a horror film. I don't know why it's being marketed as a horror film. I keep seeing sound bites and snippets that are like, the scariest horror film you'll see all year. This film will terrify you. It won't. It won't terrify you. It's maybe a thriller and a family drama, but a horror it is not. It is not scary. It does not have scares in the way that a horror should. It annoyed me that it's being marketed as a horror. Again, like I said, interesting concept, and it is spooky. Like, there is ghosty stuff going on. There's a lot of conversation about death and grief and existential stuff and where do we go after we die, but it is not a horror film. And the absolute straw that broke the camel's back for me with this film was the acting, because the acting was awful and it categorically ruined the film. And I don't say that lightly. We've all seen films where actors have given varied performances. You know, some actors are brilliant, some maybe are not so good. The acting in this film is bad, and it really ruined the film for me. The script was dire, and that coupled with bad acting meant that I really did think this film was disastrous. There is a monologue at the end of the film, right? And I don't want to give too much away, but there is a monologue said by one of the characters at the end of the film, which could and should have been bone chilling. Like, it should have had the audience in the palm of its hand. That monologue should have been the type of monologue that makes you go, how well do I know the people in my life? How well do I know the people that I think I know? It was one of those monologues where I was like, oh, this could have been perfect. And yet, to me, it felt uncomfortable and amateur. I was watching it going, please stop talking. This is so cringy. I cannot watch any more of this. Please stop talking. It is making me want to curl up into a ball like a woodlouse. And it might not just be the bad acting. Maybe it was a combination of just poor writing, and the monologues just didn't work. Like, oh God, they were so cringy. They made me really uncomfortable. And I think because that ending monologue in particular was so poor that then the ending itself felt really rushed and anticlimactic. I was like, this is clever. Like, this is a clever ending. And it's a clever commentary on time and hauntings and grief and space and all of those things. But yet, you've somehow managed to ruin it. And I'm not entirely sure how. And another thing, right? I just remembered this. I was under the impression that Julia Fox was in this film. People have lots of thoughts about Julia Fox. I personally really like her. Okay, big fan of Julia Fox. And I was like, cool, Julia Fox is in this film. She's in it for about 5 minutes at the beginning. She plays the estate agent. That's it. She's barely in it. And I'm not happy about that. I'm not happy about that at all. I just feel like with this film, you know, it had so much potential. It could have been really good. It could have been really interesting. But the script and the acting was so appalling. Like, you do not have to go with the first draft. And sometimes things don't work. Sometimes things don't work out loud. It's okay to go, oh shit, actually, I don't think that works out loud. Let's try and rejig this monologue. Let's try and rejig this ridiculous speech. Let's try and do that. And maybe actually this will make this film more effective. I need to breathe because I'm really taking this film very personally. I'm giving it 1 star. Okay, it's getting 1 star from me. And the 1 star is for an interesting idea for a premise. And actually the story itself isn't too bad. Maybe 1.5 stars. Go on, have a half a star. Yeah, just wait until it comes out on streaming and watch it then, okay? Okay. And for today's episode, we're going down the realm of the wild and the wonderful. You guys know I love an absurd story, and every so often we gotta do an alien story to keep the alien people happy, okay? That means both the people who like to listen to stories about aliens and also the aliens who are listening. We need to keep them all happy, especially these ones that we're about to talk about today. I will also say that I am aware that This Paranormal Life did a similar episode very recently. I promise I did not steal their idea or their content. It was on my list of episodes to do, okay? And we're doing it. And let's just say that Kit and Rory stole my idea first, okay? And for all the alien likers out there, you little freaks, I do have a serious alien episode coming up soon, which I realised is the reason why I am terrified of aliens. It is the pinpoint of all of my alien trauma and alien fear. I know, crazy. So today we are deep diving into the world of praying mantis aliens. And you know what? I'm so excited. It's pretty safe to say that most of us, if not all of us, have heard about aliens in one way or another. But usually when we picture them in our minds, we see grey or green bald figures with big bulging eyes riding in a flying saucer. These two species are the most common source of alien or UFO sightings, and have been given the nicknames the Greys and the Little Green Men. But have you heard about the praying mantis aliens? These even more mysterious species of extraterrestrials get their names from the shape of their bodies and their heads. Witnesses describe them as somewhat short, insect-like beings with big black eyes and antennas on their heads. Their heads are described as looking like almond in shape and bigger versions of either a praying mantis's head or a grasshopper's. Tales of these mantis creatures can be found in Native American and African folklore, where many tribes across Africa believe that it was praying mantises that created life and gave humanity the gift of fire. More modern reports of sightings and witness interactions with this species of alien go all the way back to the 1950s and come from all over the world. The first documented sighting we were able to get our hands on comes from southern Germany in 1958. The witness in this report was now a grown man, and he recounted all of the times he had come into contact with these beings during his childhood. They were, and I quote, insect-like in appearance. The beings looked like they were cloned and came floating into the room, one behind the other, like they were under remote control. What the witness would talk about next is a familiar story. He claimed that these insect-like creatures performed multiple invasive medical procedures and experiments on him. He would never forget the pain of the procedures done to his stomach for the rest of his life. It became almost a normal part of his life that his mother would come into his room in the mornings and find him drenched in sweat. The bed would be soaked through and his bedding tossed around the room like the boy had kicked it off during his sleep. The boy would tell his mother whenever these creatures had come for him during the night, but his mother would tell him that it had all been a dream. But that very same year, and halfway across the globe, a witness in New York was about to have their own terrifying experience with these praying mantis-like aliens. She was driving along a then deserted road. The road was usually well travelled and she would have usually been in good company as she made her way home. But this time the circumstances were different. A storm raged through the area and most people had decided to stay indoors rather than risk the weather. The woman picked her way down the road driving at an especially slow speed, not just because of the terrible conditions outside, but because she had her child in the car with her too. It was her daughter who would later go on to describe what happened to her and her mother that day. Thunder crashed, and the rain was beating down on the slowly moving vehicle, when the driver spotted something in the middle of the road. It looked like a plane had fallen victim to the storm and had crashed. But as the car inched closer, both mother and daughter realised that that wasn't the case. What the two of them saw in front of them seemed to be a pillar made out of light that was slowly sinking into the ground. Neither of them could make any sense out of what they were looking at, but both of them knew that they were better off leaving it well enough alone. Her mother continued to drive as fast as she could, hoping that they could just leave whatever it was that was in the middle of the road behind them. But then, the car stalled. Like something out of a movie, their vehicle came to a complete stop, almost right in front of that pillar of light, and no matter how many times the mother tried to restart it, nothing worked. Mother and daughter began to panic. and the mother knew that if she was going to get her child out of there safely, then she was going to have to risk going outside and checking under the hood of her car. She unbuckled her seatbelt, but then she stopped dead in her tracks because two figures had just stepped out of that pillar of light. They had 4 legs and a tail. They had feelers, or what looked like antennae, on their heads, and they looked like giant insects. Both mother and daughter only saw these creatures for a few seconds before they disappeared, and that pillar of light darted up into the sky, vanished behind the storm clouds. Almost as if by magic, the car suddenly started working again, and the mother was able to switch the headlights back on to see what was left around them. Wanting to check that the coast was clear, she got out of the safety of her vehicle and headed over to where they had both seen the light. The snow in that area had melted away, leaving behind a perfect circle of grass that was warm to the touch. She then got back in her car and drove her daughter away as quickly as the storm would allow. Another account of these insect-like creatures came in a few years later in North America. Documented by noted UFO researcher Linda Moulton Howe, Linda Porter described her encounter with the praying mantis aliens from when she was a teenager. She was at school in 1961 and out in the hallway when Linda claimed she was visited by one of these creatures. Before she had the chance to understand what was happening, she was standing in a lit room, face to face with an alien. He stood very still, Linda would later say, and simply waited as if he knew how frightening he appeared to me. He walked me to his room, filled with dense light. The memory ends with me about to enter the room. It was in that room that Linda claimed to have experienced the impossible. She said that the praying mantis alien used telepathy to communicate with her and reveal the existence of other dimensions. But there was more to the story. This creature then used those dimensions to take Linda's soul from one body to another body that belonged to a clone of herself. All this, she claimed, was because she had been born with a heart defect, and the alien had sent her into a new and healthy body. Were experiences and second chances at life like the one Linda lived through the reason behind all of these extraterrestrial medical experiments? Or was there something else going on? I stood there, helpless for the longest time. Another witness would describe her run-in with these creatures, seemingly determined to unlock all of the medical mysteries our body contain. All of a sudden, there were 2 beings that appeared next to my friend. They seemed to push me right aside and silently went right to work on her like skilled surgeons. I had no idea who they were or what they were doing. Then I focused on my friend and saw her head was split wide open, like these aliens sliced it perfectly open. I saw freshly sliced raw flesh, and these aliens and praying mantises were busily removing pieces of bone, rock, or whatever from her brain. I seemed to black out, and I don't remember any more of it. Was this the price to pay for those amongst us lucky enough to suddenly receive a healthy, cloned version of ourselves? Medical experiments and missing time plague the accounts of those who claim to have been visited by these insect-like creatures. In 1967, Paul Nelson from California would lose 2 hours of his day only to undergo hypnosis as an adult and finally get the truth. In his visions of a past memory, Paul discovered that he and his friend had been kidnapped and taken into an underground facility by aliens that looked like giant praying mantises. These aliens took all sorts of samples from the then 12-year-old boys before dropping them back off like nothing had happened. 6 years later, a man named Mike Shea was driving his car in Cooksville, Maryland, and about 15 minutes away from his destination, when he spotted what looked like a beam of light hitting a nearby barn. He would wake up 2 hours later, still driving his car, and only then pulling up to his friend's house that he had been on his way to visit. Years later, under hypnosis, Mike would find out that he had actually seen 4 figures on the side of the road that day that had looked like huge grasshoppers. He now remembers being taken into their spacecraft, where these creatures took several samples from him before letting him go. Only a few years later, a teenage girl in Alby, Tarn, heard a knocking on the farmhouse door. She was a British exchange student in America, and the husband and wife that she had been staying with were away in town to run some errands, leaving her alone. "Who is it?" the girl, whose name was Emma, asked through the door. She could feel that something wasn't quite right, like some instinct inside her had kicked in and was urging her to keep away from the front door. She could hear some sort of rattling or clicking coming from the other side of the door, almost like a rattlesnake shaking its tail. "I said, who is that?" Emma tried again, but all she got in return was more rattling. She stole a peek through the window by the side of the door, and what she would see would terrify her for the rest of her life. Standing outside the door was what seemed to be a giant praying mantis. This creature was taller than the others in previous reports and was almost 6 feet tall. The rattling was coming from, as Emma would describe it, his large penis cracking against the shell of his lower abdomen. Emma made eye contact with this otherworldly creature and ducked away from the window. Something had told her not to open the front door before, and now she was doubly sure that she wasn't going to. Terrified for her life, she started sprinting up the stairs to get to her bedroom, but then she remembered that the family kept a shotgun. She grabbed it, headed downstairs to get the ammunition and tried to load it. Emma had never shot a gun in her life. She wasn't even exactly sure how to do it, but she knew she had to defend herself. She just about managed to break open the gun and load 2 rounds before the beast knocked at the door again. "Get out of here," Emma warned. But when the creature knocked again, she lifted the shotgun and she fired. The shotgun blast blew a hole through the front door, and it seemed like she either missed the creature or his body was simply made out of something that was too strong to shoot through. Instead of being scared off, this giant praying mantis then began to watch Emma through the hole in the door and continued to make his rattling sound. Emma reloaded and aimed her gun through the hole in the door, this time hoping to hit whatever it was on the other side of it directly. The praying mantis seemed to have a change of heart, and just as Emma was about to pull the trigger for the second time, he ran away. For a split second, Emma thought that everything was over, but a voice in her head told her to be sure. She grabbed a few more rounds of ammunition and headed upstairs. From her bedroom window, she had a good overview of the land surrounding the house, and it was through that window that she spotted something terrifying. Sticking out from behind the trunk of one of the trees on the farm were 2 antennae. Emma knew that she was in real trouble then, and just as she was thinking of using the phone downstairs to call for help, it rang. She rushed back down to answer it, hoping that whoever it was on the other end would be able to save her.
"Open the door,"
the voice on the phone said as soon as Emma had answered it.
"Open the door."
Every time the voice repeated itself, it would become more and more distorted, almost like it was taking the person on the other end more and more effort just to speak. By the time they just about managed to get out the last and very distorted
"Open the door,"
Emma had realised that it was actually the creature outside messing with her. She threw down the receiver and was on her way back upstairs when she heard something tap on the window. She didn't even look this time. She fired 2 shots straight through the window, shattering the glass and giving her enough time to sneak back upstairs. From her bedroom window, she noticed that the antennae were gone from behind the tree. But a few moments later, something would happen that would make her believe that the creature was finally gone as well. Antoine, the man that Emma had been staying with, leaned out from behind the tree and smiled up at Emma. Emma sighed a big sigh of relief and started trying to talk to Antoine through the window. He never responded to any of Emma's questions, though. Instead, he would keep smiling and waving and using his hands to beckon Emma to follow him. A voice inside Emma told her to stay where she was, and she listened. A short while later, a second Antoine appeared at the front door. This time, looking completely shocked over the state of his house, and his wife Aeneas right beside him. Emma rushed out and herded the couple back into the safety of the house, all the while telling them about this strange creature that had attacked her. Antoine and Aeneas were, perhaps understandably, a bit reluctant to believe her. That was until they found what appeared to be a rubbery shell of Antoine's face and upper body hidden behind the tree outside. Within an hour, the rubbery mask had completely disintegrated. More recent sightings come in from Cyprus in 2016 when a group of friends sat out in the yard one evening. One of these friends then got up to refill her glass in the kitchen, and it was through the kitchen window that she watched as something happened to her friends outside. One of the women leaned in closer and spoke to the other. After a moment of silence, my friend pointed out an unusually bright star moving across the sky, assuming it may have been a comet or something. After a brief moment, I looked up at it again to realise that it was stationary, around 75 to 100 feet above the tree line. I sat there, staring at this thing in complete shock. I tried to get out of my chair to hurry inside, but I felt an overwhelming feeling of paralysis. The women later described an insect-like creature appearing out of the light. It walked up to the fence surrounding the property before quickly disappearing. But what the women outside didn't realise was that it had pointed some sort of device at them. It was only the friend watching back from the house who noticed the creature and its device. And she is maybe one of the people in most recent history to have witnessed another of these praying mantis medical experiments up close and personal. On October the 31st, 2019, Brent Swanser wrote an article for Mysterious Universe. In it, he wrote, "It may sound completely absurd, like something out of a bad science fiction movie, but there are actually numerous reports of encounters with such entities running throughout a range of ages and walks of life. Such encounters can come in conjunction with UFO sightings and abductions, but just as often are reported by witnesses who see these creatures just roaming about. And the reports are so varied and weird that it is hard to know what to make of them at times. While most commonly associated with the UFO phenomenon and lumped together as aliens, Mantis Man sightings often happen out in the wilderness with no mention of UFOs, as if a particularly freakish Bigfoot report, and a few of these occurred as recently as the early 2000s in the state of New Jersey. The first in this series of encounters allegedly happened in 2002 at Stevens State Park, north of Hackettstown, New Jersey, where two men had been fishing at dusk along the Musconetcong River, when they saw something very odd indeed. A friend of one of the witnesses would tell Lon Strickler of Phantoms and Monsters of the surreal events that would transpire. Apparently about a year ago, my friend and his brother were down at Stevens State Park fishing right around dusk. During this time, while his brother was roughly 50 yards downstream fishing, he said he felt this strange vibration in his right ear, and from that he turned and looked to the right. When he turned and looked to the right, he said he saw this 6 to 7 foot praying mantis looking man just standing there, and unable to believe that he could see him. He said the creature was black and grey, and to be quite honest, the way my buddy was telling me this story, I was having a tough time. I know that he saw this thing because I could see it in his face." Strickler would end up digging up another sighting of what seems to be a very similar creature in the same vicinity, which was seen by another fisherman as well. The witness claims that he had been out fishing at the river with his boss in 2004, and that they had both been waist high in the water when he said he just suddenly noticed a very outlandish entity making its way up the opposite bank. He explained, "I just caught it, movement out of the corner of my eye, to my left, and there it was. Humanoid, tall, 6 foot at least, no reference points, but I sense 6'6" to 7 foot. moving away from me up the bank. I'm chest high in the river. The first thing I see was this grasshopper thigh, but bending forward like a human. Then the whole form. He's looking at me over his shoulder, moving up the bank, astonished, amazed. What, that I am in the water in a strong current, that I can see him? But yes, we lock eyes and this creature is astonished. I get the sense that he can't believe I'm in the water, that he can't believe that I have seen him, that I'm not perturbed at all. Something of all three, I still don't know. Just astonishment. And he is actually trying to get away from me and the water. It's a triangular head, huge, slanted, black eyes, just like a praying mantis. Its whole body was gangly, knobby, and you could still sense that it was powerful. And no, I would not say that it was a big bug. It was definitely humanoid, despite the mantis insect qualities. Again, I stressed the strong impression that the mantis man was cloaked, and I caught it just right. It abruptly found itself against a new blank background and was adjusting quickly. No, I don't believe that it slipped into another dimension or plane. I detected movement and first saw that strong left thigh and strong right calf. Then the whole thing, and immediately those eyes and that face. The whole encounter was only a couple of seconds. I cannot tell you with any strong certainty what its feet or hands looked like. I wasn't looking there. But I can tell you that its arms were normal and not like literal mantis forelegs I've recently seen in drawings of these aliens. The detail that it seemed so surprised to be seen is interesting, although it is hard to know what to make of that. Yet another sighting featured on Phantoms and Monsters happened in the same area, this time in July of 2014, by a witness who claims that he had been driving along the same river and just sort of taken in the scenery when he noticed something very tall standing out in the water. At first he took it to be a fisherman, but it seemed too strange looking and somehow not human, so he slowed down to get a closer look. This is when he would realise that it was definitely no fisherman, and he says of his encounter, "I saw something strange a few weeks ago on the river near my home here in Hackettstown, New Jersey. I was driving home from the drugstore on Newbur Road. As I drove near the bridge over the river, I noticed to my left something, I thought a fisherman, standing in the river just off the south bank. I slowed the car and looked closer. It wasn't a person, and it was transparent-like with a weird shape. It moved slowly towards the bank and into the trees. I drove further so I could see it coming out of the trees, and that's the last I saw of it. It was tall, like 8 feet or so, and had long, thin arms hanging off of it. The colour was a pale brown, but I could see through it. The head was small compared to the body. It was sunny that day, so I thought it may be glare from the water. But after I thought back, I realised I wasn't seeing a mirage or a glare. This one seems to have been trying to cloak itself somehow, perhaps why the entity in the previous encounter was so baffled that it was seen. Another seemingly similar creature, although much smaller than these previous accounts, was also reported, this time in 2011 along the Thames River in Connecticut. The woman claimed that she had been driving home from work at around midnight when she saw something she could not explain. She said, "I saw a small 1.5 to 2 foot tall praying mantis humanoid running on the side of Pequot Avenue in New London, Connecticut. The avenue runs alongside the Thames River, and I was driving southbound on Pequot when I saw it on the side of the road directly on my left. It was a mahogany brown colour. I stopped my car and watched it, and it was looking right at me the whole while as it ran towards a storm drain. It never took its eyes off me, and then it jumped down the storm drain." Interestingly, another of these creatures was spotted in 2015 in the vicinity of Big Basin Redwoods State Park in California, which was related to the show Coast to Coast AM, and involved the witness seeing an 8-foot-tall mantis man that apparently had the ability to turn invisible or vanish at will. Here we have looked at merely a selection from the files of truly otherworldly encounters with insect humanoids, and it is all really quite a lot to take in. What could possibly lie at the root of such reports? Are these things aliens or undiscovered creatures of some sort? With regards to mantis men, the theory that these are interdimensional travellers is often brought up. So could that possibly be what is going on here? These beings coming across the veil between realities rather than across the sea of stars? Are these just hallucinations, delusions, or lies? As it is, we're left pretty baffled by such reports. And it has come to the point where these accounts are largely even shunned by those within cryptozoology, ufology, and the paranormal world in general. Yet, still these sightings and reports come in. And it sure does make one wonder just what is going on here. Now look, listener, don't you say a single word. Don't you utter a sound. Because I'm going to play you something. I don't normally do this. The outtakes are the outtakes, okay? But I'm going to play you just a selection of outtakes from today's episode, okay? The rattling was coming from, as Emma would describe it, his large penis cracking against... Fuck's sake. What am I doing with my life? His large penis cracking against the shell of his lower abdomen. Emma made out. This giant praying mantis then began to watch Emma through the hole in the door and Oh, stop it. Stop laughing. Sticking out from behind. I'm trying so hard. But I can't stop thinking about the penis. So that is merely a selection of the outtakes of today's episode. It has taken me 2 days to record this because I just could not stop laughing. And look, I'm not trying to like always, I'm not trying to delegitimize these people's stories. I'm not trying to be like, ha ha ha, aren't they so stupid having these interactions with whatever the fuck this is. But when you're telling me that a giant praying mantis is at the door and its penis is knocking against its like exoskeleton. Hear me out. Sorry, I had to go away there and compose myself. I'm sorry. That was a tasteless hear me out joke. I take it back to Emma in the story. I am sorry. This Emma in real life is actually just a 12-year-old boy. I'm just a teenage boy. That's the sense of humor I have, okay? I would also like to point out the reason I was laughing so much is because the exoskeleton penis situation made me laugh a lot. And then when she blasted a hole through the door with the shotgun and it was like she looked the praying mantis in the eye, I immediately in my brain went, well, which eye was that? And then finally when it was like, and she saw sticking out from behind the tree, I of course was like, a penis? So there we are. That was why I found that so incredibly funny. So let's take this back a bit, right? And start taking this a bit seriously and actually discuss what's going on here. No more taking the piss, I promise. First of all, mantis creatures obviously are in Native American and African folklore, right? There's also images of like mantis men that have been found on petroglyphs in different parts of the world. But I do think it's important to recognise that these like mantis man petroglyphs are sometimes used in stories like this in order to kind of say, you know, ancient people were experiencing this too, as though it is somehow evidence that these things exist. However, I would argue that the mantis man pictures that we see, I mean, they're like, whatever, it's just a man with multiple arms and legs. There's a bazillion reasons as to why ancient people might have drawn that on a wall as a petroglyph, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it is proof that Mantis Man has been knocking around for a very long time. And I do think that we seem to be engaging with two very different types of Mantis Man or Mantis aliens, praying Mantis aliens. I don't even know what moniker I should use for them. Like, I have no idea. But it seems like we're dealing with two very specifically different types. There's like the technological type where people are being whooshed off up into a spaceship to do, I don't know, mind control and medical experiments and whatever. And then there's the type that are just knocking around in a river in the middle of nowhere. Those are very different things. And again, right, it's not up to me to say these things didn't happen to these people. I think that these people experienced something, right? And as always with, these stories, we could all say, well, those stories aren't true because you found them on various websites on the internet, blah, blah, blah. And as always, all the sources are linked in the description, right? But yeah, we could say that that's easy, but then that's actually not fun to try and dissect the stories a little bit and digest what's going on. I think something happened to these people. I think they experienced something. I just don't know what that something is. I do think that the people who believe they have been abducted by these mantis creatures, and some of these abduction stories are really detailed, like I was abducted and I was given a new body, and I was abducted and my friend was operated on in front of me, and there was lots of stories of people who believe that they were abducted by these creatures and kind of experimented on medically in some way, shape or form. And I sort of was looking at like what leads people to believe that they've been abducted by aliens. Like, they obviously, like, people who say they've been abducted by aliens, I think 9 times out of 10 they really do believe that it's happened, right? Again, so I'm not taking that away from people, but there are psychological reasons as to why somebody might believe they were abducted by aliens. And the first article I came across was on Psychology Today, and basically, they said the first thing that you need to think about is false memories. And we talk about this regularly on the podcast, particularly when people undergo hypnosis. False memories are very easy to implant, surprisingly easy to implant, apparently. And if you want a good example of that, I would recommend looking up the false memories and the hypnosis in the Satanic Panic in America I think it was in the 1970s, 1980s. So while hypnosis can be a really powerful tool, and regression hypnosis can be a really powerful tool, we also need to take that with a pinch of salt and think about the fact that implanted memories are a real issue within that realm, within that sphere of how we navigate the brain, right? Secondly, there is a whole thing about dream reality confusion. So people with sleep disorders can end up having something called dream delusions. Now, I've personally experienced this when I was particularly sleep deprived and particularly mentally unwell. I've experienced not being able to decipher what was dream and what was reality, and it is a very disconcerting thing because you really think that the dream that you had really happened, and that's scary, right? And again, and this is the last point, right, that came up in this Psychology Today article, which I thought was fascinating, and I just hadn't considered it before, which is that sexual masochists, so that always sounds like a really horribly negative thing, like a sexual masochist, like you're some sort of freak. Not at all. So a masochist is somebody who likes pain in varying degrees inflicted on them during sex, right? So that could be, use your imagination, right? Pain in varying degrees, maybe humiliation, maybe, being tied up, lack of control, all of that stuff, right? But apparently people who are sexual masochists are especially susceptible to false memories and dream reality confusion involving aliens. How fascinating is that? Because a lot of the alien abduction stories, they are like, I was abducted, I couldn't move, I was operated on, I was frightened, I felt humiliated, I was, stripped naked, they were doing all these things to me. How interesting is that? Never made that connection before. And a couple of years ago, I spoke to my friend Roanna about this, and we did a Patreon episode about why people believe they've been abducted by aliens. And apparently there is also a link between people who claim to have been abducted by aliens and medical trauma, which makes sense, right? You have some sort of medical trauma and then you're reliving that, these alien beings that are coming into your body and doing things to your body and taking control over you. So I've put the link to those articles in the description of this episode, and also a research paper by Harvard University. So it's not like this phenomenon of people being abducted by aliens has not been researched, right? People are researching it. People are interested. Scientists want to know, why do people believe this? Because scientists look at these people and think they really believe something happened to them. So in that case, something has happened to them, right? Because they really believe it. Whether it's psychological, whether it's a dream, whether it is some sort of false memory, but something has happened to these people. But the fact that these people are experiencing some sort of praying mantis, I think is wild. Because we think about aliens as alien greys, little green men. We don't really think about praying mantises. But yet here we are with 1,000,001 witness accounts of people saying, I have experienced this thing. And I also would like to say that, in regards to, say, Linda's story where she's like, the aliens gave me a new body. Surely there would be evidence of that. You know what I mean? She says, I was born with a heart defect. So surely there's evidence you were born with a heart defect. And then surely there was evidence that that heart defect had then disappeared. Right? So these medical claims should be provable. They should be provable medical claims. And then we move on to Emma's story. Now imagine you're sitting at home and you're like, wow, what's that at the door? And then you go to the door, you look out, and it's a fucking giant praying mantis with a penis rattling against its exoskeleton. Stop it. Stop it. Like, what was the intention there? Do you know, like, genuinely, what was the intention? It sounds like the beginning of one of the eroticas that I have read on Patreon over the years. That's what it sounds like. And here's the thing, this thing communicates with her over the phone, right? And then I also started laughing because I was doing the open the door voice, right? But I kept doing it I kept distorting it to be really high pitched, and it was really making me laugh. Anyway, so she realizes it's the creature outside messing with her, and then suddenly it's got a fucking rubber mask on of the man of the house. I don't think so. Why didn't you just use the mask in the first place? So why are you putting on the mask afterwards? Put the mask on, then go to the door and she'll let you in. For praying mantis creatures that apparently travel across the universe and do medical experiments on people, they aren't actually that clever. And then in regards to these kind of sightings in the wild where we're sort of imagining that maybe this praying mantis is actually some sort of cryptid rather than an alien. That's how I read it anyway. I just wonder about the fact that insects can't grow past a certain size. So it's to do with their skeleton, first of all, and also to do with the way that they breathe. They just can't grow really big. And I do, again, like I said, I do think these people experienced something. Is it a giant praying mantis? I don't know. And this idea that the praying mantis is like, shit, these people can see me. My camouflage isn't working. I just don't know. And you know what it is, right? You know what annoyed me about this as well? At the end of Brent Swanser's article, he writes about how people who see these praying mantis creatures, whatever, it's sort of dismissed within cryptozoology, ufology, and the paranormal world in general. And I personally find that really frustrating, right? I mean, you can respect that these people have experienced something, and you can say, hey, something has happened to these people. Do I necessarily believe that giant praying mantises are scooping people up into spacecrafts and doing medical experiments? Do I necessarily believe that giant praying mantises have big penises? I mean, maybe, I don't know. And do I necessarily believe they're making masks of people and wearing those masks at sort of bad times, I would say? Not necessarily. But do I believe that these people experience something and they've got a right to tell their story? Absolutely yes. I don't think it's fair of the cryptozoology, ufology and paranormal community to be like, haha, that's so stupid, you can't talk about praying mantises, when I have read some outlandish, outrageous stuff about Bigfoot in the past. And look, I'm not necessarily a believer in praying mantis aliens. I just don't know why they look like praying mantises either. But then again, I suppose if we're going to be talking about the multiverse, if we're going to be talking about interdimensional beings, the possibilities are pretty much limitless, right? So maybe the world is full of invisible, sex-crazed praying mantises. And like I said, this Paranormal Life have recently done an episode about praying mantis aliens too. So guys, if you're listening, I apologise, but it was on my schedule and I don't like change, okay? And this is a break from what I normally do, but I just find it so entertaining Whether or not you believe it's true, whether or not you believe it's absurd, whether or not you think maybe this is psychological, maybe these people are dreaming, maybe they're sexual masochists, you know, I don't know, right? Either way, whatever the answer is, I find these stories fascinating. Thank you so much for listening to today's wild and wonderful episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you would like to send in your story, it does not have to be about praying mantises. You can send it to reallifeghoststoriespodcast@gmail.com. You can also check out the website reallifeghoststoriespodcast.com. And if you are desperate for some extra content, you can subscribe to the Patreon. That is patreon.com/reallifeghoststories, where for $5 a month or $2 a month, you get access to heaps of extra content, as well as every single main and mini episode completely ad-free. And on that note, I shall see you next time.